Hi, everybody. Thank you today for joining us for our webinar on RWP training in particular. We're going to go ahead and get started. I see some people are still joining us. So today I'm teaming up with Paul Rogalske. We're going to talk through the refresher training portions of 214. And some of you I know, many of you may have heard me speak at the regional meetings with J.R. Gilner, but I want to take a minute and talk through the supplemental training that's now available for roadway worker protection. There's a couple contractors on the call. I think this is something that'll be great for contractors for the short lines and railroaders on the call. I think it's also something that you can use to be proactive in your contractor compliance. So for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Katie Inouye. I'm the founder of Spark TS, and I have Paul Rogalske with me. He also has quite a bit of background in railroad 243 training, as well as just overall instructional design within the railroad. Both of us have worked at Class 1 railroads, and glad to be here. Many of you know quite a bit about Spark already, but just an introduction to Spark TS. We have RailTasker, as many, which is becoming more and more every day a comprehensive software solution for FRA and DOT compliance. And we also are a TPA, which means we do the drug and alcohol testing through RailTasker, which is not only a convenient and fast way to receive those services, but you get the advantage of all the record keeping that comes with RailTasker. And then, of course, 243, that's where we got started, right? All that FRA-approved training and regulatory support, which is what we're talking about a little bit today. Now, some of you may have noticed yesterday that we were posting on LinkedIn. We sent out some emails this morning or late last night. Last Wednesday, we were acquired by RailCube, so very exciting. We have Dennis Hendriksen from RailCube with us. I'll introduce him in just a moment. So we are part of the RailCube family, RailTasker. In meeting and learning more about RailCube, what I will say is that it's very complementary to what we're doing with RailTasker. And we'll take just a few minutes before we dive into part 214 to talk through that a little bit. As we go through part 214 and as the webinar progresses, at the end, we'll definitely take questions from you all on any of the things from today. But I wanted to pause and acknowledge this because it is a big announcement. So that said, we have Dennis with us. And Dennis, if you could just introduce yourself and a little bit about RailCube before we dive into today's topic.
Thanks very much, Katie. And thanks, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is Dennis Hendriksen. I'm the CEO of RailCube. For those of you that don't know RailCube, I'll give a very short introduction. Also, I'm gladly to report that we're going to host another webinar so that we can do an introduction of what RailCube is. Here on the screen, you see actually our solution. RailCube is a very comprehensive software package which launched in 2012 for the first time, so we exist over 12 years. And that basically we are serving now over 100 railway undertakings in Europe, and all over Europe, actually in 23 different countries. On a daily basis, we have approximately 6,000 to 7,000 people are using it here. We also have a very large customer in Australia called Pacific National. That's that on our client base. We specifically focus on freight railway undertakings. And what RailCube is, yeah, as I said, a comprehensive software package with 3 applications in the suite. We've got a desktop application. That's the big screen that you see there on the middle. That is being basically used by the people that work in the office of the railway undertaking. And it goes from salespeople to dispatchers, planners of staff, planners of locomotives, planners of the transport, but also fleet/asset management, HR, safety, finance, you name it, everyone that's working in the office. We really want that, to get Excel out of the windows and basically use RailCube. For everyone working outside, so that is your inspectors, conductors, technical personnel, but also train drivers. They're using our RailCube mobile app that is supported by both Android and iOS. And that is from check in, check out of their duty, check what their kind of activities they need to do, checklists, document management, but also report damages to rail cars or locomotives, you name it. There's a lot of functionality available for train drivers. A huge focus on safety, of course. And then third is a web portal that you see there on the bottom right of the print screen. and that is used by external parties, third parties around the railway undertaking. So any suppliers, clients, or terminals, workshops, we really want to bring down the communication by phone, fax, email, and have them communicate with you, with railway undertakings through this web portal. It's one backend, and in the backend they're all connected, so there is real-time integration between these applications. 12, as I said, 12 years of development in this, so there's a lot of modules, and for which basically we use the community approach, where we asked all of our clients, which go from state-owned railway undertakings to small private railway undertakings, we ask them for input, so they decide the roadmap. It's not that we reinvent the wheel. Everything that you see in RailCube is designed by our client base. And finally, I just would like to say that RailCube, we're very excited to be working together with Katie and her team. As Katie mentioned, is a very complementary tool that Katie and her team built, RailTasker, and all of the regulatory requirements, which we hope to be integrating over the next while, really bolting it onto for what we have in terms of functionality or services. There's not much going to change, albeit that we're going to be opening up RailCube modules and functionality for those of you interested. And finally, basically we're focusing on both being a TMS as well as a labor management system, a crew calling system at the same time. So I guess we cracked that nut and have that available for our European clients, but soon also for North American clients. And I'll be happy to answer any questions right now, or you can also contact me after this session. Have a look at railcube.com or on our LinkedIn page for further information, and hope to see you in the webinar early March, where we demo RailCube to everyone interested.
Thanks, Dennis. So given the announcement, I thought it was appropriate we took a little bit of time, you all, to do that. From what I've seen, RailCube is really an effective and intuitive product. So we'd be excited to share that with you. If I was a betting person, Dennis, I would have put some bets on this question. Does RailCube have an hours of service module?
Absolutely, yeah. We're big in hours of service. We have a huge time registration functionality, both in the desktop as well as the mobile application. It starts with check in, check out of the duty, but we've also embedded all of the labor laws. You can configure your own company rules. We do payroll calculations. We're huge in hours of service, absolutely, which we can also showcase in the webinar in March, if you like.
I warned Dennis that I can't go anywhere without being asked that question of where's hours of service. So more to come on that. For all of our maintenance away friends, I want to move on to part 214. So back to, this is fun stuff, back to the world of FRA compliance. So thanks, Dennis. I'm just going to keep chugging along. On part 214. So we've been talking a little bit about part 214 this last year. Definitely want to just dial in on some of the new resources and changes that or I should say more new agreements that we've made with FRA to make this easier for you all. So Paul is going to get us started, and then I'll talk a little bit about the supplemental training pieces, and at the end we'll do questions and answer, a Q&A session. And again, you can talk through 214, 243. We have Holly here, so any random 219 questions, we'll just open it up on anything. So go ahead, Paul.
Great. Hello, everybody. If you haven't met me, if I haven't worked with you, I'm Paul Rogalske. Been working with Spark for 8 months now. But as Katie mentioned, I came from a class 1. I was their 243 person, a RailTasker admin person, and I've got an instructional design background. Just a quick bio there. So part 214, training requirements. As it says there, all your roadway workers have to have initial and recurrent training once every calendar year for 214.343. Part or .345 lists the minimum training requirements for all roadway workers. So there's minimum things that everybody has to have just to be a roadway worker. And then there's also additional training that's laid out for lone workers, watchmen lookouts, a couple other roadway workers in charge, positions like that we've described on the next slide. So probably not new information to anybody. Everybody knows they have to have training, and this is one of the ones that does require annual training. Even though part 243 says generally 3-year refresher training for everybody, it doesn't supersede the requirement in part 214 for the annual recurrent training. So just want to make sure that's clear for everybody. So these are the other specific positions or job duties that require additional training. to be qualified in. So you see we have lone worker, watchman lookout, flagman, roadway worker in charge, and then anybody that's operating a roadway maintenance machine. I don't think we get too much into the roadway maintenance machines today, but we can, if you have questions, we can answer those as well. We're looking more, for the roadway workers themselves.
One thing I just want to add here is 214 has been an emphasis in the industry for the last year for a reason. We've had a lot of scrutiny. This is also where we've had our fatalities, unfortunately, and particularly with people working around roadway maintenance machines. And unfortunately, for those of you on the call, in the past, the short line industry really haven't had a lot of fatalities, and that has changed in the recent times. And it also has impacted contractors. RMMs, for the obvious reasons, have been the focus of FRA. I think that you could talk about 243 and Part 214. There's a lot of details we could go into. And so based on questions, happy to talk through it. This is at this level seems pretty straightforward, but then an application can get really complex, right? When we talk about RMMs, how are you categorizing them? How are you doing that initial training? Certainly that initial qualification for all the positions that Paul listed here need that initial hands-on training with demonstrated proficiency. And as you start peeling back layers of 214 training, it gets more and more complicated. For the contractors that are going to multiple properties and those sorts of things, we have some ideas later in the webinar to talk about, but it is an area where you really want to be proactive. And so hopefully we can give you guys some ideas on to be proactive. Maybe don't look for the minimum, but look at how you can be, and a lot of you already do this. But for the railroads, how can you be proactive in managing contractors? And I like to, Holly's not usually in the room or virtually in the room when I do this, but I like to pick on the 219 folks on how they're managing their contractors and talk that through. We'll keep going through just high level these things, but really any sort of questions on 214, please ask, and Paul and I will help you guys. If there's any topic in this umbrella, we can talk through it in more detail.
Yeah, and while we're here, when we talk about the roadway maintenance machines, a question I get a lot that I've had from several people is about, because there's a specific call out for roadway maintenance machines with cranes.
Mm-hmm.
And when people picture cranes, they picture the big boom cranes, things like that. But as far as 243 is concerned, anything that has a boom that can lift and move a load is considered a crane. So even your regular work trucks, if they've got the little boom on the back that they use to pick up, whether it's ties or just equipment, whatever it is, those are considered cranes under 243. Your roadway maintenance machine operators, if they have a truck that has any boom on it that can lift and move a load, they will need that additional crane training under 243.
Also with crane training is like the one thing that you really can't grandfather people in. Now I know we're a little past the times of grandfathering people in since that was May 1st of 2021, but it still comes up. And that hands-on training, that is something that went into effect prior to 243. So that is just needs to be done regardless. Spark happens to have FRA-approved online crane training that I think is well designed, not that I'm biased. And then also FRA-approved OJT checklist or proficiency checklist. We've got all of that and covered. Also, while we're talking about it, we happen to have Spanish versions of our roadway worker protection and our RMM course. We know that a lot of the workforce in the US who are doing these roles are generally, or oftentimes I should say, native Spanish speakers versus English speakers. We have those resources too.
We see here when we get into the roadway worker protection training, it requires training to be specific to a railroad's on-track safety program and operating rules. What that means is you can take, if you are a customer of ours and you take our general roadway worker protection training course, you do still need that specific training from the railroad that you're working with. One of the things that Katie has worked with the FRA and the ASLRA on is a supplemental annual training handout that railroads can use to provide that annual training on the railroad's rules. We mentioned before already, and Katie's going to get into that here in just a little bit, what that training handout looks like. I'm not going to get too deep into all of her, go through that. As we mentioned before, there are additional rules training for RWICs and lone workers. Since they're the ones that are providing protection, they have to have additional training beyond just the basic roadway worker training. There's that job aid template again that's been vetted by the FRA-43 team. So the FRA is on board with this template. Katie spent a lot of time working on it with the ASLRA and the FRA to get this in place. And I think it says there, this template that lets contractors, and if you're working with multiple railroads, you need multiple RWP courses. You can take that core course, like I said, if you're one of our customers, or Spark course, and then you get a job aid for each railroad rather than having to have a specific one for each railroad. They can use this template and makes it a lot easier.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I'm gonna walk through this supplemental training document. This is one of those times where it's like beautiful, where you have a really complex problem and the answer maybe took several years to get everybody to agree, but it's very simple. So it's not complex to walk you all through this, but I think it's one of those things that has a big impact. And I've been working on it since 2017, chipping away slowly at Rob Castiglione on this one and getting him to agree. It was great that we did collaborate with FRA on it. I had a meeting with some folks on Rob's team, specifically it was Corey and Lance at that time. I brought up this idea and they were in full agreement. At that point, I looped in JR and the ASLRA because I thought it'd be nice to collaborate. And so if you are a member, and I know many of you are, this is a resource available for you. I think JR posted it under compliance templates under 214 and 243. And you all know I do a lot on the Safety and Training Committee for the benefit of the industry through the ASLRA. This is the one time where I was like, JR, I've been working on this for years. Let's collaborate, but this is truly a joint document. There's a lot of you, if you guys aren't members, sometimes I can't share some of that work. This is an exception, certainly. So I'm just gonna go ahead and walk through this. If you're a member, you can get it through the member portal. Oh, can you guys see that when I switched into Word? I think so, yeah. Otherwise, you can get it from Paul and I. The beauty of this is, okay, let's just supplemental trainings. If you all, which a lot of you are on the RailTasker LMS, you can take our Roadway Worker Protection course. You can have your employees take that. And then this, for our contractors, is something that could be completed per host railroad. Certainly, we all know a problem in the industry is contractors or people going from property to property are taking roadway worker protection A to Z. The larger contractors sometimes spend multiple days on this as a training course, taking the same content over and over. They're going to do Conrails, and then they do G&Ws, and then they do this railroad, and then they do whatever class one. And by the end, they've taken 8 roadway worker protections. I don't know. I think they're a little dizzy on distances and speeds for RMMs, and they probably at that stage don't even know what a lone worker or RWIC stands for. It's, as a training professional, it's just not a good practice at all. This is exactly what it is, supplemental training. The red is what you would remove or have instructions for. And it is intended to be your RWP training. You could take a generic training and then provide this to employees for the host railroad specific. Now, a lot of you on the call are railroads, short lines in particular, and not necessarily contractors. For you, what I would suggest is taking this document, and maybe you heard JR and I talk about this at the regional meetings, but you could complete this and proactively share it with your contractors to ensure that they're getting the rules that they need to be compliant with your program. So that way, if they're taking an RWP course with us at Spark or Rail Pros, or maybe they had to take a specific class like the CSX class, but then they can go on your property and be compliant with that course plus this. The other thing I just want to address is that it's an industry practice and not a requirement that our roadway workers carry cards, right? This is not coming from the FRA. This is just something we've always done. I don't know how it started. It was that way when I started at the class 1 that I started at. It existed, and it probably existed for many years prior to that. In fact, I've helped some of my customers with FRA inspectors that get all worked up when people don't have their roadway worker protection card on them like it is a requirement. That's how long we've been doing it, not a requirement. I just want to say that many of you are using RailTasker. Our certification qualification module generates electronic cards in the app. So if you wanted to set up host railroad specific requirements, or if you're a short line and you want to have an RWP card for your RWICs, lone worker, just roadway worker, RMM operators, and I know you all might just have one card, that's fine. That is something you can do now with RailTasker, and it will easily track those different host railroad requirements. So back to this document, roadway worker protection is roadway worker protection. Most of you, oftentimes, a lot of you have just other than main track, and then it's really straightforward. If you're using exclusive track occupancy, it can be a little bit different, right? This document is just specific to your property, and we got FRA to agree that these are the things that people need to know that are different. Purpose and application, it is considered training. This was something in conversations with FRA took a lot of refocusing. This is not a job aid. This is supplemental training provided once a calendar year. And then we talk through roles and responsibilities. So the employer, whether you're the railroad employer or you're a contractor, you ultimately are the ones responsible for Part 243 compliance, which means you need to do the record keeping. Those are your employees. That's the summary of that. The host railroad, you need to have a 214 program, right? You need to have an on-track safety program, and you also need to maintain a list of your contractors. But so you could, as the host railroad, provide this to your contractors, and then the onus is on them. And as part of your list of contractors, you do need to go a step for a little further and make sure that they're compliant with Part 243 as a whole. But I think this allows you to be take that proactive step. Now, the things in red, again, are the things you would adjust. And these are just, again, what we agreed. FRA and Lance used to be responsible for Part 214. He worked internally at FRA to get consensus and agreement on these topics. What are your methods of on-track safety? So you would indicate those based on the property. Or if you're a contractor, fill this out for each of your customers. What are your policies around work zones and work zones around RMMs, or if you call them the red zone or what have you? All of this can come right out of your rule book. So you do not need to reinvent the wheel on this. You just take your rule book on work zones around RMMs and put it into this part of the document. I'll just highlight that 50 feet is FRA's new view of safe distances based on the investigations of the fatalities. It's if an equipment could be less based on your knowledge, but they are looking and scrutinizing safe distances, just be aware. We've got that, and then we've got our on-track safety procedures for RMMs, which includes spacing and speeds. So again, the handout walks you through that. Procedures for establishing working limits on non-controlled tracks using a flagman, so that's very specific. So this training, supplemental training, will cover everything for flagman, for train approach warning, and roadway worker protection. It doesn't cover the hands-on training, but from the knowledge portion, you can cover it this way. And then last but not least, train approach warning. So if you are a roadway worker in charge, you would need additional training that wouldn't be covered in the supplemental training. That would be specific to that host railroad's rules, but most contractors aren't taking out protection on behalf of the host railroads. This should really cover you. And even if you're only roadway workers, you need to understand the train approach warning and the flagman procedures. Hopefully this makes sense to you all. I personally am excited about it because instead of taking 7 roadway worker courses, you can take one and create the supplemental training for your employees. And as a railroad, you can be proactive providing this to your contractors. You have the peace of mind that they're getting roadway worker protection training, but that they also have your host railroad specific training. That is a lot of information, but I think something we're all familiar with. Yes, you can get a copy of the information. I can drop this into the handouts. I'll do that once I'm not driving the webinar at the very end in the big Q&A. I'll quick drop this in there, and I'm just going to make one quick change before I do that. Let's see. Let's talk through some on-the-job training pieces, and then I think we'll just take it up for questions. So Paul, I'll let you take that, and then I'll see if I can get that job aid ready to drop in as a handout.
Oh, sure thing. Okay, as we saw earlier, you have to have training and then you have to show demonstrated proficiency. Again, hopefully this isn't new news to anybody, but that was a big part of the 243 regulation. Was that in addition to classroom training, anything that required any sort of manual manipulation, anything like that requires on-the-job training, and that has to be repeated and demonstrated to achieves proficient or achieve standard. Spark, of course, has OJT checklists that you can use if you're a customer of ours. That's what RailTasker, as Katie mentioned in the beginning, that's what it started as, really was to meet this OJT requirement for Part 243. So we have checklists you can adopt, you can use. They have to complete the checklist, has to be signed off by a designated instructor for the person to be qualified. And then just recently, a few months ago, we did get field refresher training checklists approved by the FRA that you can use for your refresher training. It looks and feels very similar to the OJT checklist that you're familiar with if you're using those, but it is considered training. So there is a duration in there. There are prerequisites. There's actual objectives in there that you have to meet. So the idea of these field refresher training checklists is that you, as a supervisor or trainer or manager, would go out into the field with the people that are doing this refresher training. You would walk through the objectives. You would talk through any new technologies, new procedures that are out there, anything that's new from the previous year. And then you would watch your employees, whoever's doing the training, actually do the tasks that are in the checklist, sign them off just like you would in a regular OJT checklist, and that would meet your requirement for your refresher training. We do have one for RWIC that covers RWIC and lone worker. And you can adopt that in the FRA 243 portal. And if you do, we put it right into your RailTasker system, and you can use it just like any other checklist to meet that refresher requirement.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to emphasize that was another thing that, I mean, even when I was working for a class 1, I was setting up Rob because I felt like refresher training could be easier completed in the field with a checklist. And he went back and forth on that. And then with the new, you can't test out of things with the new NPRM in the proposed rule, that was at risk. But we do have FRA-approved refresher checklists. Like Paul said, they're going to have a duration, they're going to have a learning objective. So the intention is that you maybe review content, and then it's also the assessment. And those are all available. And I think for a short line, and I used to work for a smaller class 1, I felt like there was certain jobs within that class 1 that it would just been easier than coming up with really technical training. Signal maintainers, to be certain, and of course now we've got a certification hanging over us, but it is an option, and I think something that could be useful for the smaller companies in the industry for sure. Well done, Paul, on getting those approved. I think at that point we are at the questions. There was a question, Paul, and I chatted back, but on the crane program.
Yeah, the question is, can I use the Railroad Crane Operator online course in RailTasker's LMS to train my employees that operate equipment with booms? Yes, you can. We just need to make sure if that's the initiative, if you're using it for initial training, you also have to complete the roadway maintenance machine with crane OJT as well. And we do have refresher training as well for roadway maintenance machines, inspections, and for the crane operators as well for the refresher training.
Great, thank you.
There was another question, says, will there be a report a railroad can run to verify the contractor employees have completed the required training?
Will there be a report a railroad can run to verify contractors' employees have completed the required training? A report from so what I would say is that the employer, which is the contractor, is required for their own training records. We have a lot of contractors using RailTasker in particular, and if they are, there's reports in our certification and qualification module, and there's reports in the learning management system. One thing I didn't emphasize strongly enough is that this is supplemental training, that handout that I just put in the handout section for you all. So you should record that as such. So if you're using the RailTasker LMS, I would recommend you put that handout in the LMS and have individuals actually review it. You can put it in PowerPoint and our LMS will convert that to an online course. I would do that per host railroad. Now, specifically to this question about a report for contractors to give to the railroad, you can request that from your contractors. It's not like Part 219 where they're required to give you an MIS report. It is only required that the FRA only requires you to just get an acknowledgement from the contractor that they are compliant with Part 243. I always recommend that you get that acknowledgement that explicitly includes proficiency or on-the-job training, periodic oversight. and host railroad specific training for on-track safety. So you can get an acknowledgement. You don't need a report, but that's up to you if you have a preference for that. And I think that's why people like these cards, right? So if you're the contractors using RailTasker, they can use those electronic cards per host railroad, or they might have cards. But I think that's where that part of that card thing came from. We're always here to help. I'm so glad to have Paul as part of the team. It's like I kept saying I need to duplicate myself, and then I found Paul and I actually was able to duplicate myself. So he's just as knowledgeable and can be of great assistance. Please reach out with questions. All right, talk to you guys later. Thank you.